I'm not wearing hockey pads.
So once upon a time, there was a company called Rocksteady that made a single PlayStation 2/original Xbox game that got okay reviews. I guess thanks to their parent company Eidos, they got to make the well-known and beloved Batman Arkham Asylum. Released in 2009 on 7th generation consoles, Batman Arkham Asylum was a smash hit that put Rocksteady officially on the map of game development. It introduced an entirely fresh style of gameplay that fit the aesthetic of Batman and was a blast to play. It was so good that they got to make 2 sequels, and other companies were brought in to make a prequel, 4 mobile games, a VR game, a similar game that takes place in another universe or storyline and it's co-op, and then Rocksteady is slated to release another successor based around a completely different group, and that game will come out, hopefully. The Arkham series is a faithful, wonderful, dark, and gripping experience based around Batman that's still talked about and beloved to this day. But what if I wanted more intrigue about one of the most hated characters in the game because his tasks are tedious and drawn out and his personality kind of sucks? Holy tie-ins, Batman! A book! Batman Arkham Knight Riddler's Gambit is a prequel novel to Batman Arkham Knight. It was published by Titan Books and written by Alex Irvine, who has written another Batman tie-in novel before, as well as many other tie-ins, comics, and original novels, including the multi-award winning A Scattering of Jades. He's also big on baseball and was a Jeopardy champion at one point.
Oh, no.
But does his prior experience in comics and with Batman lend credence to his abilities here? Does his take on the Arkhamverse complement the darker tone of the games? How well does this set up Arkham Knight as a whole, and does it serve to add anything substantial to the game? Is it even good?
What is this? It's a meme, Batman.
The book comes in at a decent 316 pages, mass market paperback, and was released about 22 days before Arkham Knight came out. Well, according to just what Google says anyway, apparently the Arkham Wiki, among other sources, say that it was released on the same day, and Amazon says it was released the day after? So, where the hell's Google getting this information that says it came out like a month beforehand? Whatever. Anyway, the book itself takes place months after the Arkham City incident and well before the Arkham Knight incident. All in all, it's not a bad read. It kicks off quite quickly, and there's seldom a dull moment. For Batman, that's a lot quicker paced than other stories that I've seen. But what is Batman? Okay, that's a broad question considering... So, I'll just take a note here from every Batman media ever and dramatically explain the origins of Batman. Bruce Wayne was but a young boy when he and his family went out to watch a movie. Dramatic pause. They began to walk down an alley. Crime alley. Dramatic lightning. A mugger comes around the corner and stops the trio, raising a deadly gun up. He demands the lady's pearls. She refuses, and the mugger grabs for them, causing them to break apart, despite that meaning that they're fake and she's very obviously rich, as the pearls dramatically clink against the cold concrete of an equally cold night. The equally cold man, so aptly named Joe Chill, coldly raises his gun and fires on Bruce Wayne's parents anyway, causing them to die and become cold corpses. Why does he do it? Who knows? The reasons vary from issue to issue of whatever author is handling this comic run. But one thing is for certain, the young Bruce Wayne would want vengeance and decides to dedicate his life to beating the absolute Christ out of criminals because he is sad. That's Batman, baby! Okay, but on the real, Batman's a crime fighter who uses the idea of bats and fear to stop crime. His parents died as a boy, so he used his bajillion dollars for trust fund to become a vigilante. The story started in 1939 when Batman had goofy-looking purple gloves and everything was a lot campier. In this particular setting, however, known as the Arkham setting, it takes on a much darker tone surrounding events that began in Arkham Asylum and typically follow a good chunk of Batman's rogues gallery. You, of course, play as Batman for the story of these games, attempting to stop a megaplot to level out or destroy a major part of Gotham or kill a lot of people, with the setting surrounding the notorious Arkham Asylum, or a part of the city that got separated specifically for criminals named Arkham City. The typical antagonist of these two games was none other than Batman's arch-nemesis, the Joker. Except in Arkham City, the Jonker donkered and died. Venezuela! This leads to a major paradigm shift in the whole story, where, before the final game of the series, is where our book takes place. This time for the book, it follows the exploits of another notorious Batman villain named the Riddler, as he tries to effectively take the place of the Joker and become the crime underlord of Gotham. With this in mind, let's introduce 4 of our major players in the Riddler's Gambit.
Batman, a.k.a. Brookie Waney.
It's Batman. I mean, he's a household name at this point. He's one of, if not the most popular comic book characters to ever exist. Like, my son's high chair is Batman themed. It's very hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't know who Batman is. But I'll explain anyway, because I'm a nice person. He's a billionaire playboy philanthropist. I can't say that word. He's a billionaire playboy philanthropist by day, vigilante crime fighter by night. His parents died as a boy, and when he got older, he swore an oath of vengeance against crime. In the games and the novel, he's a very serious, stoic man with exceptional martial arts skills and plenty of nifty gadgets at his disposal, which he very intelligently uses to his advantage. He's a genius and very intimidating. His flaws lie in that he's stubborn and not one to give up on his tasks. In the book as well, he's tackling the psychological ramifications of his arch-nemesis of what is essentially years, if not a decade at this point in time, having died, and what it means to live in a world without Joker. So much so that we see this kind of discourse at the start of the book. On a more personal level, yet just as disturbingly irrational as the city's apparent grief, Bruce was grappling with the psychological effect of the Joker's death. They had been mortal enemies for so long that he couldn't help but experience a kind of loss, twisted though it might seem. Sad boy hours. Next we have
Robin, a.k.a. Tim Drakey.
He's Batman's sidekick, having deduced his identity on his own and going through a whole arc where he becomes the new Robin. In almost all, and in the Arkham iteration of Robins, he's the 3rd Robin to be, succeeding Dick Grayson, who became Nightwing, and Jason Todd, who died. Or did he? Tim is a resourceful young man who is definitely more light-hearted than Batman. He's sharp and very brave, yet also somewhat headstrong. He's almost not entirely as resilient as Batman, almost succumbing to hypothermia about a quarter ways into the book. And as of recent comic news, he's a bisexual king! Let's go! Anyway, he's certainly less stoic than Batman is, and he's kind of a nicer counterpart to him in terms of personality, yet he still has a bit of an air of self-sufficiency and stubbornness, like when he's initially investigating what's going on. It crossed Robin's mind to pull out and contact the Batcave, but he didn't like the idea. It felt too cautious, and he didn't want them to think he couldn't handle himself. Batman was always reining him in, and right now Robin had the freedom to tackle this problem any way he saw fit. Was he trying to prove something? Sure, no point denying it, but he was also capable. He had trained himself well, and he wasn't afraid of the Riddler. He could figure this out on his own.
Hell yeah, I love my little gay boy.
Next we have
The Riddle, a.k.a. Eddie Nashton, a.k.a. Enigma.
Christ, make up your mind with Nick. The Riddler, to sum him up aptly, is if a creepy basement dweller actually had the agency and smarts to fulfill his sinister plans. He's methodical, and while he's intelligent, he's also too egotistical for his own good. In the Arkham games, he's hidden collectible question marks around whatever setting you're in, and you have to go around and both find the trophies and solve visual riddles that he's also hidden around. People absolutely despise him in the games because his challenges are super tedious. People who want to 100% the games have to go through his long-winded challenges and puzzles that 9 out of 10 times you're gonna look up a guide for anyway, because God knows it took me about 3 hours of looking at a guide and going back and forth trying to find where in the hell the last trophy was! Anyway, in the books he's different because he actually makes a thought-out plan to try and outsmart Batman, and the action follows him working from afar. A lot of his personality shines from what he set up more than the few scenes we get from himself. The problem is, though, that the scenes that we do get from the Riddler feel not really in his character. Like when a thug that's working for him compares him to the Joker, and the Riddler doesn't like that. If the Joker had kept control over the mechanical guardians, there's no telling how much damage he'd have done. If he was calling the shots, that'd be all she wrote. The smile disappeared from the Riddler's face. "That will be all," he said, and the man looked startled, He turned to leave, approaching the door. Nigma shot him in the back. He collapsed without a sound.
Hold on, kitten. Daddy has to ban a troublemaker that put a meme in general chat.
You think he would just explain or chew him out, but instead he just shoots him, and that just doesn't feel right, but I'll touch more on this later.
And finally, one thing I'm gonna call attention to isn't so much one singular character, but rather something that
Irvine
does that gives more life into the book. Our fourth character is
Satan.
Reading through this book was a treat because despite there being more than just the three previously mentioned, the other characters don't have as much agency and integration into the plot as much as the media does. Oracle is kinda just there, but she's not as prominent as the other three who have a lot more agency. Commissioner Gordon has agency, but you don't really see him a lot, and he doesn't really drive the plot forward as much as everything else. At least not until the end, and at least the inciting incident in the beginning. They're important, sure, but not so much that I really need to take the time to talk about them. What the author does, however, is something extremely smart. Between pretty much every chapter, and as a prologue of sorts, he has a news journal or a media blurb or an interview segment that lets you know how different people around Gotham are feeling about the situation as it unfolds. Not only does it serve as clever exposition, but it also serves as a good way to summarize what you've been reading up to that point. I haven't seen anything else like that in anything I've read, and I have to applaud how creative and smart this method is. It breathes a lot more life into the world that I'm reading about when I see that the media is handling the developing situation in different ways. It gives you different viewpoints, and it's just handled fantastically. It also has a lot of charm that helps turn these blurbs between chapters into a bit of comedic relief. Like when Jack Ryder starts talking about this. Midday Gotham with Jack Ryder. GNN Cable News Network, WGTU Gotham City Radio. Jack Ryder enters to rock and roll theme music resembling a famous song, but not quite closely enough for him to be sued. It's a bit of a real moment that, as someone who's briefly worked in radio and as a content creator, feels real to me, and it gave me a bit of a chuckle. It also helps remind me that the story takes place during the day for the most part, which is a bit jarring considering that most Batman stories are at night. What's even crazier is that this exact method was used by the author before. In many of his other works, like the Pacific Rim novelization, he also has media blurbs or different flyers or sheets or something to serve the same purpose as it does here. But the kicker is that the author has written for Batman before. Back in 2006, Irvine, dude, I'm sorry, I'm gonna get your name wrong, please forgive me. Alex Irvine wrote Batman Inferno, a tie-in novel with an absolutely frightening cover, wherein the Joker finds the Batcave, and because of another villain coming in to try and impress him, the Joker decides to don the Batsuit and stop him. I haven't read it myself yet, but from that alone, it seems like a fun read. The Joker seems like the kind of sadistic, goofy, evil being that would come upon his arch nemesis' hideout and decide that instead of figuring out what his identity is or sabotaging his equipment to get the upper hand, he's like, no, I hate this guy trying to upstage me. I'm gonna go kick his ass with my mortal enemy suit because I can. Society. Full grain of salt. I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know the full details, but I digress. Going back to the matter at hand, the media used in Batman Inferno at a glance seems one-to-one for what Irvine has done here, right down to the names. Dwayne Trask, Rafael del Toro, both of these names appear in Inferno. Irvine has cheekily lifted these and made great use of these characters and their shows in the Riddler's Gambit. It really enhances my experience reading this novel, and it's one of the many things I enjoyed about it. The pacing is actually not entirely slow at first. After a somewhat brief chapter, the action kicks in almost immediately afterwards. It keeps a good pace and everything within is quite well written. The book keeps going back and forth between the perspectives of Batman and Robin, and each viewpoint feels different enough to continually be engaging. The action is easy to follow and well thought out, with some great moments from both Batman and Robin. Like here, where Batman fights a few thugs in a bank.
The smoke swirled up, obscuring the view from the corner where the three remaining gunmen continued to fire wildly. Knowing that out-of-control shooting tended to go high rather than low, Batman dropped into a crouch and lunged through the cloud. He hit one of them low and heard the snap of bone breaking in the man's leg.
Before his target even started to scream, Batman was already spinning to drive his right elbow into the midsection of the goon to his left, doubling him over. Continuing the spin, he caught the barrel jacket of the last thug's gun, ripped it from his hands, and smashed him across the head with the stock. There's plenty to like about this book, in my opinion. As I mentioned earlier, the media plays a decent role in this book. One other neat character that appears is Vicky Vale, a longtime Batman comics character who is effectively a superstar reporter in Gotham. She not only has a few media blurbs of her own, but eventually appears in the action itself when Robin is going through Riddler's basement of cum jars and puzzles. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, it's leaning a bit into spoiler territory, so... But wait, up in the sky! It's a bird. It's a plane. It's coming straight at us. Oh my...
Well, guess who's gonna visit me in jail, Batman? My parents.
What? Parents?
Spoiler, isn't that the name of a Batman character? She's not here. Get out of here. Batman can't be women. Our story begins, actually, with a media blurb from Rafael del Toro, catching the audience up to speed. Bullseye by Rafael del Toro, GothamGazette.com. I've never made any secret of my disdain for the so-called Batman, and I'm not going to start now. It's been months since we saw him screeching through the streets of our fair city in his bat car, or swooping around in Arkham City attacking the Tiger agents charged with keeping the civil order, or doing any of the other things he does to take the law into his own hands. In other words, it's been months since Batman has told us, the people of Gotham City, that we're not good enough or smart enough to take care of ourselves. Hooray! He talks about how quiet the city has been since Batman stopped Protocol 10, and how crime is a bit down. Batman's fault in the first place, maybe? More at 11. This is what I like about the media segment. See? This stuff is good. Chef Boyardum. But if you want to know the actual beginning of the story, our story begins with the Riddler scheming in a dank hole, thinking of different ways to be a bad. The Riddler waited. He watched. He observed and recorded, and when he had seen enough, he began to form his observations into plans. How to transform a joke into a riddle. The media hook and the Riddler start are both exceptional ways to introduce the audience to the story. Riddler is shown here to be a methodical thinker, carefully trying to lay out a proper gambit, as the title implies. I mean, normally he looks like a mega nerd that doesn't shower or talk to women, but hey, props to Irvine for making him seem actually threatening. After that, we move on to Bruce Wayne brooding and thinking about how sad he is that the Joker is gone. He doesn't want to admit it, but it's actually affecting him deeply. Much deeper than it should be, he figures. But then he muses that it's only somewhat fair, as yes, the two had been adversaries for decades, so it's akin to losing someone who is an active, integral part of your life. It's only a bit morbid and skewed because it's the Joker, a mass-murdering maniac, making the man melancholy. Anyway, Tim Drake and Alfred are there, and they're like, yo, Bruce, it's okay to cry over losing your boyfriend. And Bruce is just like, no, shut. But for real, Bruce talks about how he doesn't trust how quiet Gotham City is. Tim, working on the Batmobile, concurs. Alfred chimes in too, but they all get interrupted by Commissioner Gordon calling a private landline?
Yes, Commissioner.
Honestly. Anyway, Batman goes, and there's a great scene setter of how people feel about Batman. While it really doesn't take much reading to get from the Batcave to the GCPD, this bit of flavor really gives a lot of life to the book. Within minutes, he was suited up, and moments after that, he was in the Batmobile. Before long, the armored vehicle was roaring through Gotham City, past Theater Row, through Chinatown, skirting Amusement Mile and the casino. People turned to watch. Some cheered, some cursed and made obscene gestures. In other words, everything was normal. He gets to the GCPD and sees the source of the trouble. It's a package that was delivered and addressed from the Joker. But he's dead, so how? Batman's like, no, and scans it to see that it's a USB. He calls Oracle, aka Barbara Gordon, aka the former Batgirl. Batman, Robin, and Oracle all conference call into the Batcave together, where they decide to plug it in. A strange USB device. I could easily fry any device it's plugged into, or have malware, or something. Whatever, YOLO, Batman says, and Oracle takes a look through it.
Batman inserted the USB drive into the terminal and watched as a directory spawned. The drive's firmware folder was labeled ha ha ha. Next was deleted. The third and final folder was called TikTok.
They're all corrupt, Batgirl said. No known file type, no clues in the file names. TikTok is an app. I already tweeted the obvious joke to
Irvine
himself, who responded to it. But yeah, there's just that inside of the USB, so they activate it and a countdown starts. The countdown begins at 2 minutes, and once it's done, nothing happens outright. Although this scene is kinda goofy, like, they're just kinda standing around like, oh, let's just watch the funny countdown and hope that it isn't somehow a bomb or a trap that'll kill us all. By the way, Oracle, I've always loved you. Shoutouts to Bruce Timm for ruining the relationship between Batgirl and Batman by having them bone. You horny bastard, I hate you. Anyway, nothing happens outright, and the counter goes back up to an hour. They keep looking and see a picture of the steel mill in the computer's files and I am larval 8 times over. Alfred is like, yo soy español hablar, and rearranges it to maravilla, which means wonder in Spanish. But oh snap, Commissioner Gordon calls and someone got murdered by a bullet that says TikTok on it. I wonder what kind of TikTok challenge that is. And then we're off to the wacky races as our story really begins. A riddle appears on screen, and that means, oh, okay, yeah, it's Riddler time. Batman and Robin split up, with Robin going out to the steel mill to check it out, and Batman going to a place where he suspected that the riddle meant.
The timer window expanded, and a line of text appeared below the countdown.
Vault ahead! Don't get boxed in. You can bank on finding something to sink your teeth into. So he goes to the Gotham Merchants Bank, which is one of the final battles between the Bat and Clown. But the last time they did this was Arkham Origins, which was many, many years ago? Okay, this is something I'll touch on later, so don't worry. This is about where the story splits up. After a brief look back at the Riddler, who is just absolutely frothing in ecstasy at the plan going as he wants, the chapters start to go back and forth between Batman and Robin. Robin goes under the steel mill where he encounters a strange puzzle room that confirms that it's him and not Batman at the puzzle room, and whereas Batman is chasing clues around Gotham. As the story progresses, both have to work together in tandem to solve Robin's puzzles to get to the bottom of the Riddler's gambit. When Batman gets to the Merchant's Bank, this is where we see our first taste of action, and it's quite well done, both in terms of actual physical coordination and how Batman feels about it afterwards.
Before the thugs could draw a bead on him, he threw down a smoke pellet, swept his cape out to the right, and dodged to his left. The triple burst of gunfire shredded the edge of the cape, and also shredded the gunman Batman had missed with his batarang. He felt a pang of guilt, but there was nothing he could have done. People in their line of business assumed the risk of collateral damage.
Thugs die, I guess. Can't help being a Gemini. At least he doesn't just blatantly chuck live grenades into small enclosures with thugs. Anyways, Batman finishes there. He finds a large animal tooth in a safe deposit box as the bank explodes. Again, from the last time it did. Whoops! It's at this point that once Batman goes back into the Batcave, Robin gets faced with his first challenge. After a brief chess-themed room, he solves the riddle there and is in a giant drain basin of sorts. After he conquers that, and getting absolutely drenched, Batman starts to piece together that the challenge is related to another Rogues Gallery member, Killer Croc. In fact, as the story progresses, all of Robin's challenges relate to different Batman villains who are at large. For Robin, the puzzles and the villains they relate to are, in this order, a giant drain basin that relates to Killer Croc, a strange freezer chemistry puzzle that relates to Mr. Freeze, and a tea room that relates to the Mad Hatter. All of these villains are out and about doing heinous activities in Gotham City, and Batman has to both go and stop them and figure out how they relate to the puzzle that Robin is facing. It's actually interesting to see just how deep the Riddler's influence went when it came to setting these up, because it's very soon learned that the Riddler had conscripted them for his gambit. The puzzles are very well thought out, as well as the agency to solve them. There's a lot of thought put not only into the puzzle, but the environment of the puzzles. Like for the freezer puzzle, since Robin just got out of the drain basin where he got absolutely drenched.
Pursuing that track, he lay on his back, ignoring the shock of the cold concrete. He slid himself under one of the formations, scooting along the floor until he had moved along its entire length. Something about it tugged at his memory, but the cold was slowing his mind again. He wasn't shivering anymore, and a distant alarm bell went off in his head. Wasn't that a bad thing? He drifted a little and nearly fell asleep. No! Robin jerked like someone snapping out of a dream. Frost crackled in the parts of his cloak that were touching the frigid surface.
It's absolutely freezing, so it creates more tension for the audience and leads to a more gripping moment. As far as the puzzle itself, I will say that this part was somewhat confusing, but all in all, I got through it decently, and I don't know chemistry. See for yourself.
Timing is everything. First, you'll have to figure out which of them represents the lead-acid combination, which represents the lithium ion, Batman said.
Ion isn't too specific,
Robin said.
What's a lithium-ion battery run on? What's the compound?
In the batteries the Riddler gave Mr. Freeze, it's lithium cobalt oxide.
Lithium cobalt oxide, Robin said. That's LiCO2. You get the idea. Whatever, he solves it. Yeah! So anywho, it's also interesting because Harley Quinn shows up in the book briefly, extremely angry and upset because the Joker died. She's in the Mad Hatter puzzle where Vicky Vale is being held hostage by her. She had been promised an interview by the Riddler, but walked into a trap because duh. So Harley is the Red Queen, wants revenge outside of the Riddler's plan, and just kinda leaves after confronting Robin. She actually has a really legit line when speaking to Robin, and it makes her seem only slightly less psychotic and more unhinged, but logical, if that makes sense.
You know what a jester is?
She said. Why don't you tell me?
The old jesters used to ride with the king and whisper into his ear things like, "You're just a man, you're gonna die." They were the only ones who could talk to the king like he was an ordinary man, an ordinary mortal. That's what I'm saying to you, Mr. Robin. And I know you'll tell Batman too. You're ordinary men, you're going to die. You're no different than anyone else. That's called a memento mori, and that's what I am. Now that Mr. J is gone, I'm making sure you know that before long, you'll be gone too.
Should really hire actors for this series, now that I think about it.
It was refreshing to see that she wasn't just treated like an absolutely pure, unhinged psycho that made no sense. All of this comes to a head once two things happen almost simultaneously. The first is that Robin beats all the Riddler puzzles and comes across a large, dark room that has a mechanical guardian suit. The place starts exploding and he needs to leave through a drain pipe, so he gets in the safe metal suit that's there and is able to get out of the room. But oh no, because of the previous Mad Hatter puzzle where he had a small bit of paper that said, "Eat me," akin to Alice in Wonderland, it had nanites that allowed the Riddler to control him. The second thing that happened is that Batman was able to trace down the next and final assassination target and stop the assassin Deadshot from killing this guy named Ouellette. They confront each other, and the scene here is kind of interesting in terms of how Deadshot just gets to Batman. Batman asks him why the hell Deadshot is doing this for Riddler, and Batman doesn't like the idea that the Riddler is trying to replace the Joker.
I would have thought you had that all figured out already. He shook his head. You go off on a tangent looking for deep, dark motives, when the simple truth is right there, staring you in the face. He was right. The answer had been right in front of him the entire time, and he'd refused to see it. I've seen that look before, Deadshot said. You thought the Riddler was playing some sort of twisted game. Think again, bud. He's shooting for the top, and that's what he's been trying to tell you this whole time. Man, wait till word gets around. He started to laugh. Batman drew back and knocked him out with a single punch, pouring all of his anger and frustration, and yes, embarrassment, into the blow. Deadshot went down and stayed down.
Okay, it reads a little weirdly. Again, this is something I'll get to in more detail here soon, but like, everything up to this point is good and well thought out, but it seems a bit weird how this whole scene just plays out, and it feels kinda not Arkham-y? Like, maybe I'm not just getting it? But like, the thing that really makes the scene feel out of place is what Ouellette says at the end.
Batman heard a whimper in the corner.
I thought you didn't do stuff like that,
Ouellette said. Batman turned, and the man wouldn't look him in the eye. You thought wrong, he said. Then he kicked open the window and was gone.
I don't know, but after reading it, I just felt confused. Like, did Batman actually murder him? I mean, he didn't. You see later that he's being carted out on a gurney. Did it just look like he murdered him? Maybe it was a bit brutal, but to my knowledge, Batman always beats the Christ out of his villains. Is he just talking about using his emotions to just absolutely ass-blast Deadshot here? I have no idea, but moving on. So remember the I am larval thing from earlier? Well, it ties into everything because on the inside of Robin's mecha suit that he's trapped inside is the word pupa emblazoned in the glass at the top. Batman sees that and is like, Eureka! And realizes...
The letters in Imago struck him, and another piece of the Riddler's grand conundrum fell into place. Isaacson, Matosian, Angelo, Gray, Ouellette, Imago. The Riddler had presented him with the answer, but not until it was too late. The lives of 5 people had merged into the final clue, and only one of them still lived.
The first letters of the victims' names each spell out Imago, which is the third and final stage of metamorphosis. Larva, pupa, Imago. Riddler really said, I'm a beautiful butterfly, which of course means that Robin is the physical manifestation of it. So it's up to Batman to get on him and free him from the suit before Robin, under the control of the Riddler, leads the suit to the GCPD and blows it up and kills people. GCPD is like, no, sorry, Batman, gotta kill him, Lamau, him or us, and Batman's like, ugh! So he goes in under fire from the GCPD, and after solving some puzzles on the back of the Mechanical Guardian's neck, frees Robin, and out he comes, Imago! Get it? Get it? It's also great because in one of the last media blurbs, Rafael del Toro just straight up quits after everything. This will be my last column. The bullseye has at last been gouged out by the sheer carnival batshit craziness of this town. The people in it, the bat fights and the bat worship and the batty relationship between the police and vigilantes who belong right alongside the self-identified criminal lunatics in whatever dungeon replaces Arkham Asylum after I'm gone. In short, I quit. Because Batman won't. This is great because the first media blurb was from Del Toro as well, and the last one's from him. It's growth and a good way to round out the media blurbs and come full circle. Anyway, Robin is pretty much okay. Then they see the Riddler on the roof of a building nearby, but oh, it's not him, 'twas a ruse, Batman. And there's a note taunting Batman and Freedom, which says, you got played, oh! And then there's a great bit of thinking on Batman's part where he thinks about Riddler and what he's accomplished, giving him kudos for setting up such an elaborate plot, comparing him to the Joker, and then getting mad at himself for thinking such a thing. In the epilogue, the Riddler reflects and is mad that he couldn't kill Batman and Robin, but is basking in the fact that the media is talking about nothing but him. Him. His gambit paid off in the fact that his egotistical, narcissistic nature is stoked by the aftermath of his actions. It seems almost like the nature of Gotham City will be changed from fearing the Joker and having him on that pedestal of criminal mastermind to having the Riddler on that pedestal. And the final lines of the book cap it off very nicely, intriguing the audience as to what could happen next.
Because, as of now, everyone in Gotham City was talking about the Riddler as they once had talked about the Joker. Imago. It was a new day in Gotham City, a day defined not by a rictus smile, but by a question mark. And the question was, what would he do next?
And then he becomes a huge jobber in Arkham Knight, and none of this mattered.
I'll show them how many boners the Joker can make.
Okay, so the novel was good. I thought that Irvine's writing style and choice to use the media blurbs was an exceptional way to tell a Batman story. From start to finish, it was... I wrote from start to bottom, that's actually funny. From start to finish, it was very well thought out and had great action and intrigue to supplement a Batman story. I only have a few problems with the book. I've mentioned this a bit already, but there are a few bits that stuck out to me as inaccurate. There's 3 instances I have where I found a problem with the writing and sort of lore inconsistencies between the games and the book. Big preface. Please do not think that this automatically makes the book bad, or that this makes Alex Irvine a bad author. Please, please, please take into consideration everything I say here. The first is early in the book, when the three of them were looking at the USB drive on the Bat computer.
Robin watched the timer count down. "I think you're right, Batman." Tim was careful not to say Bruce, and the system altered their voices enough to prevent anyone from recognizing them. Batman thought Barbara might already know his true identity, but if she hadn't figured it out, though, there was no reason to offer it up.
Okay, hold on. Let's go to Arkham Asylum, the first game in the series where this happened.
Frank Bowles attacked him. If I find Frank, I'll find your father.
Bruce, hurry, please.
Robin, who is dating Barbara, would already know this. It feels outright strange that this would be in the book. This is a bit of a lore inconsistency as a whole. It's negligible overall, but it is something that just sticks out in the back of my head. The second instance is in Chapter 6, when we cut back to Batman at the Merchant's Bank. I had mentioned this earlier already, but very specifically...
The Gotham Merchant's Bank stood empty, as it had for months, since being badly damaged when the Joker set off an explosive in its underground vault. The Riddler had started his gambit by invoking the Joker's name, and now he was continuing it by drawing them to the location of one of the final battles between the Bat and the Clown. And then later, when a bomb goes off in the bank, the explosion had collapsed part of the outside wall of the bank on the far side from the stairwell's roof access, advancing the work the Joker had begun months before.
Okay, months ago? The last time we saw anything happen with the Joker and the Merchant's Bank was in Arkham Origins, a somewhat spin-off prequel made by a completely different company. This game takes place years before Arkham Asylum, let alone Arkham Knight. With this inconsistency, I guess you could argue that maybe just before Arkham City, maybe months before, he had a stint where he tried blowing up the bank? Or maybe slightly before Arkham Asylum. But according to this timeline, it would be almost a year since Asylum. So the wording would make more sense if it was different and reflected that. And between Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, I believe that the Joker was out of commission due to being affected by the Bane venom that he injected into himself, which also later on led to his inevitable death. Further, another quote here in the book dismisses that possibility.
"Twice I've been brought to the Gotham Merchant's Bank, and twice someone has tried to blow it up."
Twice, you say, with this being the second time. Therefore, the only other time would have been Arkham Origins, which, if we are to believe is canon, this is written very weirdly. It doesn't outright break the lore, though. If we simply change the months to years or the other appropriate verbiage, then it all makes sense and it doesn't detract from the story, and it still lines up with what Alex Irvine was going for here. The third instance of an inconsistency is a bit of a nitpick, perhaps, but still just sits weirdly with me, so I have to mention it. Later on in the book, when Batman is confronting Deadshot, Batman says something that sits strangely with me, mainly because he doesn't mention strange.
"Tell me something," Batman said, ignoring the taunt. "Why did the Riddler set you off on a timed series of assassinations? Just like the Joker did when he and Tiger were in charge here. Can't Enigma come up with his own ideas?"
When Joker and Tiger were in charge? Correct me if I'm wrong, but while Joker had his own section of Arkham City and made some heavy power plays, he wasn't in control of Tiger. That was Hugo Strange. The way it's written here, to me, says that Joker was someone in charge of Tiger, or that he had a hand in that and Protocol 10. I guess that saying Strange as a part of Tiger is correct, but in this instance, wouldn't it be more apt to say something like, when Joker and Strange were in charge? Not to mention that the wording makes it seem like the Joker had conscripted Deadshot to do the assassinations. No, it was Strange that conscripted Deadshot. Again, this is more of a nitpick than anything else, but it does stick out to me, and has me questioning a lot of stuff about this book. None of which relate to Irvine's writing quality. Please, God, don't get me wrong. Alex Irvine is not immediately a bad writer because of these hiccups in the book. Let me ask you something. Suppose a big-name AAA game is coming up to be released, and you, as an author, are hired by this company to write a tie-in novel in a set amount of time over a specific subject with only certain information being given to you about it. Do you honestly expect that, as a person who likely hasn't played these games previously and doesn't have the luxury of time to play them, to be 100% perfect in writing these novels? Besides the fact that there is another critical piece of information to take into consideration. Very briefly, let me explain what happens with a process like tie-in fiction. An author doesn't just get to decide what to write when they want to write a tie-in novel for an established universe or franchise. They're hired to do it, hence the work-for-hire process behind tie-in novels. The franchise comes in, hires the author to write something in particular, usually a broad subject that eventually gets whittled down into a finer idea, then provides them with material, referred to me as a Bible of information, and then lets the author have at it. Now, sometimes there is leeway and sometimes there isn't with what they can and cannot add into the novel. And sometimes there's the middleman of the publisher stepping in to provide this information and work. And there's especially deadlines. Why do you think the novel was released on the same day as the game? It's a prequel novel. It would be a bit weird and lead to lesser sales of the book if it was released after the game came out. What's even more is that because the franchise is hiring the author, they specifically have people who check the book for canon. Everybody is human. Everybody makes mistakes. But as well as that, authors can't just decide to put stuff into a tie-in novel they've been hired to write just because they want to. No, there are people who check this and make sure it's within the boundary of what the franchise wants. Batman can't just reveal he's Bruce Wayne to the Riddler to mess with him and then spank his ass for no good reason. So how do I know all of this? It's because I've asked tie-in authors about this process. The first was a while ago with William C. Dietz, who explained to me initially about the tie-in process. He briefly told me about how the franchise will send a Bible to the author and that there's plenty of back and forth when it comes to stuff that the author wants to write about the protagonist. Would someone like Master Chief do this, despite the fact that when he wrote Halo the Flood, there was only the first Halo game? No? Well, how the hell is he supposed to know? There's only one game. And it's not like Bungie was 100% forthright with that information. Further, I also asked esteemed tie-in author Karen Travis. You might know her from writing 3 Halo tie-ins, the Republic/Imperial Commando series for Star Wars, the Gears of War tie-in novels, and Gears of War 3 itself, and also being hated on the internet for no good reason. I inquired with her about the process, and how something like lore inaccuracies could happen with a tie-in like this. She took the time to very carefully explain the process and how this could have occurred. And in short, the buck stops with the franchise. There should be people in place with tie-ins that stop things that are out of line from happening. There should be. One thing I've found when looking up Rocksteady as a whole is a lot of discourse about how the company treats its employees. There's been accusations of higher-ups mistreating its employees and having a toxic work environment. While this sadly isn't uncommon nowadays with game development, it's a shame to see that a company that's made such a beloved game like the Arkham series be subjected to such a thing like this. Which leads me to the third and final person I reached out to, Alex Irvine himself. I messaged him when he was on vacation, but after he got back, he was gracious enough to do a general interview about Batman, the tie-in novel, and a bit about his life. I did make sure to ask about the lore tidbits itself, and I also made sure to record it this time. Just to kick things right off, my first question and one of my most important questions I've got for you is, how are you doing today? How has life been treating you as of late?
Well, I have 2 little kids in school and I have 2 older kids in college. And so that's not easy, trying to figure out, the best thing to do for them. Right. And my wife is a teacher, which adds to complications. And so last year was really difficult on teachers. It was tough on everybody, but a lot of teachers who were being asked to teach in-person classes and part virtual classes, people who don't teach or have never taught, I don't think that people really understand what that asked of them. And this year things look to be a little bit more stable, and as long as people keep getting their shots and doing the reasonable thing, then maybe that'll keep happening, I hope.
He's hoping.
Other than that, things are pretty good. Life is all right.
You're not a stranger to writing tie-in fiction. I wanted to set up this interview about the Riddler's Gambit, but first I want to call attention to Batman Inferno. That was the first tie-in novel you wrote, and this was around the time, 2006, I think, that Grant Morrison had took the reins of the actual comics and introduced Damian Wayne. I want to ask you personally, what's been your opinion on Batman himself compared to other comic book heroes, and how have you felt about him as the years have gone on?
Here's the thing, it's like Batman is, and I'm not hardly the first person to say this, like Batman's a Rorschach test in a way that very few other heroes are. If you want to know what somebody thinks about, about vigilante justice, about billionaires, about crime, about anything, you can just start a conversation about Batman, and eventually you will find out. The most interesting thing to me about Batman is that he has basically spent his entire adult life and his entire fortune building this enormous monument to his grief over his parents. It's not even a question of whether or not he, is over it or anything, but he has chosen to actively define himself by that, like his entire life. I find that's psychologically really interesting, and as a motivation for heroism, pretty interesting. And so that was my angle into Batman. And everybody who writes a Batman story, they have their own angle into Batman. And the thing is that the character is so protean in the end that all of those approaches can work. But that was mine in Inferno. Yeah, it was my first tie-in novel. And I had so much fun writing that book because all I wanted to know, they offered me the book. I think it was my third novel had just come out, sort of an alternate spooky World War II history with monsters called The Narrows. And one of the guys in the Del Rey editors group asked me if I would do a tie-in book. And I was like, I don't know, maybe. And then he came back and said, well, would you write a Batman novel? And I was like, well, of course, who wouldn't write a Batman novel? So,
right.
So I did. But then my next question was, can I use the Joker? And they said, oh yeah, totally. So then I was off and running.
Going back to the Riddler's Gambit, this was a tie-in novel for a video game series, one that already had 2 full entries and a spin-off. And I have to ask, how did you personally prepare for that compared to, say, the Tintin novelization or the Pacific Rim novelization? How different was it?
So writing a movie novelization is a really straightforward kind of experience. I'll digress briefly and then we'll get to Riddler's Gambit. You get the script and you talk to somebody at the studio to try and get a sense of how much room you have to work, because sometimes you have a lot, sometimes you don't have any at all. Every once in a while, you get to spend some time with somebody actually involved in the movie. With Pacific Rim, I got to talk to Del Toro, and after we sat down and talked, I had more understanding of where he thought the spaces for a novelization were. But then in the end, he was like, hey man, you're writing the book, you go write the book. And so I was like, okay, I will. And more often what happens is, you talk to somebody in licensing at the studio or something like that. And when you ask them, okay, I have a film script here, but this is not enough story to fill out a novel. Is it okay if I sort of fill some things in and create some subplots and do this kind of thing? Or do you just want me to kind of elaborate on what's there? And every time you get a different answer. And the more room they give you, the better the book usually is. So then you write the book, you turn it in. They complain about stuff, usually because they have changed the script without telling you. And then you have to fix that stuff. And then inevitably, the book comes out. People online complain that the book isn't right because it doesn't match the movie. And of course, what people don't realize is that you're not working from the final print of the movie because you never get to see that. You're working from some previous version of the script. So that's the process of writing a movie novelization. Now, the game was really different because they said, okay, here is Arkham Asylum games. The Joker has just died at the end of the last one.
Right.
And I said, well, what do you want me to tee up for the next one? And they didn't really have much to say there. My understanding was this was supposed to bridge in between one game to the next.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, what happens in the next game? Well, we can't really tell you.
What the hell are you supposed to work with?
Yeah, I said, so what should I do? And so they did give me a couple of little things that would link forward into the game. But basically, talked to them a couple of times, and then I said, okay, well, so, what about a story where, like, the Riddler sees that the Joker is gone and decides that this is his big chance to no longer be, like, second or third or fourth or fifth fiddle, and he's gonna take control. And they were like, yeah, okay. There were some other caveats and instructions that I got, but this was a while ago, and I don't remember all the details. So I had this book to write, and the most interesting thing about the book to me is, how does Batman feel about the Joker being gone? And then he doesn't really have a lot of time to spend considering that because then the Riddler starts doing all those Riddler things.
Right.
But that was where that one started, because so unlike a movie novelization, it was supposed to be a bridge from one story to the next, even though the stuff that happened in the book was not going to be part of either game.
You were able to pick something from Batman Inferno and you put it in the novel. I started reading a little bit of Inferno and I saw, oh, he's doing that cool thing where he's taking the media blurbs and putting them between chapters, and you reuse the names. Rafael del Toro, Dwayne Trask, and others.
Somebody noticed.
You kind of already answered it. How much more of your own personal creativity were you able to fit into there? Like, how heavy was Rocksteady with the hammer of, like, we're dictating you over this, you can only have it this way or not? Like, how much back and forth did you have?
So this was a weird one, because with Rocksteady, almost literally none. I got the initial okay on my story proposal, which was basically what I just said to you, only written down. And then once I started working on the book, I was like, yeah, I'm going to steal some stuff from Inferno and create my own little Batverse here, and this is going to be fun. That kind of thing. I find that creating those little media interstitials is a great way to do a whole lot of world building in not much time. Strategically, when you're trying to get the reader's feet on the ground in an unfamiliar world, it's a really useful thing to do. Plus, they're just fun because you can experiment with different voices. You can hint at things that are happening outside the scope of the book. You can wink and nod. You can throw your friends in there. I think a bunch of the characters in Inferno are named after my friends. Most of them don't know that because they haven't read the book, but so I did some of that same stuff in Riddler's Gambit. But ultimately, the only real tension there was editorially was that one of the people at Titan, one of the editors there, kept rewriting stuff and not telling me. I'd get proofs back and things would be different that I had not done. That was an unfortunate part of the experience, because that's never happened to me before. I've had editors who were active, but they always, were talking to me about what they wanted to do. And I've never had anybody just change stuff. Like, there's a scene in the beginning of Riddler's Gambit where the Riddler has a gun. I did not write that. And
interesting. Because
it's totally out of character for the Riddler. He would never do that. Now, having said that, that's the one downside of that book, is that a little bit of monkeying with it in the beginning, especially. I really enjoyed working on that book because it was a big exercise in puzzle design, for one thing. I like coming up with puzzles that are fun but not too hard, that make you feel like you solved something, or that you can watch somebody else solve and sort of follow along in your head. And I did that in Riddler's Gambit specifically to give the whole book some narrative thrust that wouldn't be just, one more Batman takes on his rogues gallery, because that's what we all know he's supposed to do.
Right.
And so the puzzle angle and then the big kablooey at the end were all designed to create some narrative momentum headed into the next Arkham game, but also to do it in such a way that was structured and true to the Riddler, and really showcase this one villain, who he doesn't get a lot of love. People mock him a lot, I think, but I think he's a cool character.
Weirdly enough, I kind of thought that the Riddler shooting the guy made him a little bit more intimidating, but knowing that it's not you kind of puts a weird pin in that subject. But as far as Rocksteady goes, and as far as the book goes, is that there's a few lore inconsistencies in the novel compared to the games, and mistakes happen. It's all well and good. And when Rocksteady was prepping you for the book, did they not include some of those finer details in the Bible? Or did it just slip through the cracks when they were supposed to proofread it? What was the whole process with that? Because I know they have people to proof it and make sure it's all accurate, so they don't get rabid internet fanboys up your ass about it. But I'm just curious how that went.
You're going to have to be more specific, because I don't actually remember. I don't doubt that there are inconsistencies. I 100% buy that. But I also don't pay a lot of attention to what people say about my books in internet forums. And
you shouldn't. It can be very harsh. I'm going up to bat for you.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. The best one ever was on one of my Supernatural books. Somebody was ranting on, I think my daughter pointed me to this. I was like, thanks, kid. Who went on an extended rant about one of the Supernatural books and then said, stop giving this man money. This was 10 or 12 years ago, and I'm still laughing about it. So. But yeah, no, back to the subject at hand. I guess I don't know what those inconsistencies are, and I can tell you that they could come from a couple of different things, because I know a little something about game development and a little something about, writing licensed fiction. It could be that I had information and I screwed something up, and then nobody caught it. It could be that I just wrote something and it wasn't flagged for anybody at Titan because they didn't know something, and then Rocksteady changed something during the course of their development of the game.
Right.
I mean, I could list out all the other possible scenarios too, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is a kind of the chain of custody of the continuity of a property like this has a lot of links in it. It is possible for something to go wrong basically at any moment. I mean, I'll give you another example that has to do with the movie novelization. At the end of my Pacific Rim novelization, the leads kiss. That's in the script that I was working from. This has outraged Pacific Rim fans because in the movie they don't. And I think the movie actually made the right choice. They come up from the trench and they pop up. In the draft of the script, I had to kiss. So like I said, they kiss in my book. 1,000 Solomons on the internet have been, Irvine got this wrong. And it's, I've given up. When I was first starting in this, I used to try to correct people and be like, well, as you know, but now I don't bother.
Right. It's a hard fought battle.
Yeah.
I've noticed.
And in the end, they don't care. There's this joy that they take in finding these mistakes. And who am I to deprive them of that joy?
It takes more than an author to write a book. And that's the whole takeaway. But
what are they anyway? Because I'm curious now. It's is it big stuff or just?
Oh no, it's really minor shit that you can't help but see, like people on the internet like, oh, this got wrong. The three major ones that I found were in the beginning when Batgirl, well, Oracle, formerly Batgirl, Robin and Batman, or they've plugged the USB in and they're like, oh god, it's counting down. What the hell's gonna happen? There's a point where Tim Drake says, it very specifically says he was careful not to say Bruce lest Barbara knew. And I think in Arkham Asylum and Arkham City before that happened, she straight up called him Bruce. So I'm just like, well, she would know. But
yeah,
see, it's just in minor shit. The second was it was chapter 6. I say this because I had to rewrite this a lot and check like.
You probably remember it better than I do at this point. So just
probably it's fresh in my mind. It was chapter 6. It was a little bit of a throwaway where it's like this was one of the last few scenes between Batman and Joker, like the fights. It was at the Gotham Merchants Bank, and it said it only happened twice between them, like Gotham Merchants Bank only twice. The first one was in Arkham Origins, which was like a decade before anything, and then now, and it's like I'm pretty sure they had more fights than that. But again, it's inconsequential because if you just change the verbiage to say years and it was a major fight between them, it fixes it. It's just flavor text that at the end of the day, you can easily.
Are you talking about blowing up the bank or having a fight though?
Blowing up a bank. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure. The first one, I don't know. I can't speculate because again,
it's been years and there's more than a dozen people involved in the process. I can't put the onus on you to figure out.
I would love to take it.
Why did Irvine fuck up?
No, and I would love to take it, but especially for this book, I don't know if I can because I had, this editor who came after me. So when I got my author copies of Riddler's Gambit and I flipped it open and I flipped through the first couple of pages, I was like, wait a second. So it may be that I made that mistake or it may be that somebody else did.
Right. I've talked to other authors who were like, yeah, it's on the franchise. They should hire people to do this if it's never on the author.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I 100% agree with that because I think it is on the author you're supposed to know what you're working on.
Oh yeah.
But then a lot of other things happen once you're done with the book, and usually what the franchise is supposed to do is catch this stuff and then say, hey, Alex, you got this wrong. How do you want to fix it? And then I say, oh yeah, okay, let's fix it this way, and then we do an edit. If they don't do that, that's on the franchise. But there's the companies that own characters like Batman or the Avengers or whoever have gotten so big that it's really hard for them to pay attention to something as small scale as a book. And I hate to say that,
right?
The audience for any of these licensed books is orders of magnitude smaller than the number of people who will buy the games or watch the movies, and so sometimes they just don't care. There was a funny review I did a novelization of the Marvel story Days of Future Past,
right?
Which is 2 issues of a comic, and it's a Chris Claremont story, so it's kind of a monumental thing. But when they asked me if I wanted to do a novelization of it, I was like, yeah, but there's some things I want to change because there's a couple of things that have always bugged me about this story.
Right.
And Marvel was like, yeah, okay, go ahead. So I did. And reviews of this book come out like Irvine doesn't seem to know these characters very well. And that's one of the ones I wanted to say, like, I've written more lines of Iron Man dialogue than any man alive, between games and mostly because of games. And the same probably goes for a number of other Marvel characters. And I've been working on this stuff pretty intensively. Like Disney's been paying my mortgage for almost 15 years now. You can say a lot about me, but you can't say I don't know the characters. But that reflects back to the fact that the studios don't actually, I don't know if it's that they don't care, it's just that their attention is focused elsewhere. And so if something comes out, you know, and fans start to complain about this novelization, there's nobody at Marvel who's going to, you know, write an article on Marvel.com and say, oh, you know, here's where we talked to Alex Irvine about why he made these choices in his Days of Future Past novelization, or the one I did Secret Wars too. This reflects back on the Riddler's Gambit to bring it back around to what you're talking about, in the same way that like somebody at Rocksteady could have caught this. So it's something that if it's my mistake, yeah, I should have known that. If it's, but also there, like you said, somebody at Rocksteady should have turned it back around to me and said, hey, fix this. That's a process that is different with every license book, and sometimes they turn out great, and sometimes you feel like you're just working by yourself, and then you throw the book out there and you never know what's going to happen.
Right, and not every company can be like Disney, where they have like Bibles that are thicker than my head and a whole team dedicated. I talked to another author, Mr. Dietz, who told me that Disney and Star Wars is mind-blowing with their Bibles and accuracies, but I digress.
Yeah, I wrote a Star Wars novel once.
Oh,
and, yeah, it got killed. And when The Mandalorian came out, I learned why, but nobody told me why at the time. There was a Bible called the Holocron. It used to be on a DVD that they would send you when you started working on stuff. And
I kind of like that it's called the Holocron.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I still have my Holocron somewhere. Every once in a while, some rando on the internet will email me and offer me money for it.
Oh,
yeah.
That's amazing, actually. But what are you working on now that you can discuss, or what have you recently released that you'd like to personally plug and encourage whoever the hell actually watches my video to go out and check out?
This book here, called Anthropocene Rag, which is the first like not licensed book I've written in a long time, because I haven't written a licensed book since Broken Dawn. I stopped writing movie novelizations in large part because the money is so terrible, and I'm working so much in games now that not to put too fine a point on it, it's a lot easier to make a living writing games than it is writing movie novelizations. So I kind of miss them, and every once in a while I think, it'd be neat to do those again. But I'm writing like 6 different games right now. The aforementioned comic book story of baseball, everybody should check that out. I got 3 books going right now that are, just for me. A bunch of Marvel games still. I'm working on 3 different Marvel games that are out in Asia only. So it's kind of weird to be working on a game that millions and millions of people are playing, but nobody in the US knows about. There's a game called Space Punks that just was announced that I'm writing. It's in early access right now, and it's super fun. It's like a top-down twin-stick shooter-looter game, but it's got a cool story that you can't see much of in the game yet, but as it gets built out towards open beta and towards its final release, the story's super fun. So we're doing I'm casting voice actors and all that kind of stuff for that game right now. And just, I like to tell stories in lots of different ways. So I'm tinkering with a couple of screenplays. I'm writing a bunch of short stories. I've got comic ideas that I keep meaning to get back to. So a lot.
Well, it's good to hear. Good to hear you're still definitely in work. There's no lack of work there.
Yeah, no. I mean, I got more work than I know what to do with, which is a nice problem to have. It's good to be busy. That's for sure.
Definitely. Well, that's all I have for this interview. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk about Riddler's Gambit. It's gonna add a lot, and this has been really informative. And
excellent. Yeah.
I will definitely send you the final product once it's all done, whenever the hell. I've got an hour long of audio, not just this, but another hour to comb through. So
put it all together. Yeah.
Oh yeah, with all in mind, thank you so much. I will also apologize real quick. A few times in the recording, I've messed up your name. I'm gonna dub over it horribly. I said Irvine and not Irvine, so shoot me.
You're not the first, so.
But anyway, thank you again for taking the time for this conversation. It was very fun,
I enjoyed it.
I hope you have a wonderful day.
Really, really big thanks to Alex Irvine for doing this. After everything, this should be enough to show that Alex Irvine didn't mess up Batman due to personal incompetence or not caring enough. He's a genuine dude who has a love for everything comic book and baseball, and it seems far-fetched that he would go out of his way to make mistakes like this on purpose and ruin a good book. If anything, I blame Rocksteady for all of this. I think that with everything surrounding Rocksteady and considering the lack of communication with the public about their next big project, that something more is going on behind the scenes, and that
They're the ones to focus your anger and displeasure with, not just for letting some mistakes slip through the cracks, but moreover, for their apparent mistreatment of employees and further perpetuating the image that game development studios are toxic, unsafe work environments. Wow, I got through most of that and then my voice cracked. Jesus, I'm great.
Night, Enigma.
So at the end of it all, I enjoyed what I read. It's a wonderful read from start to finish, and an excellent way to have hyped up Arkham Knight. I will say that yes, the weird lore inaccuracies do detract from it, but not so much to outright ruin the book. It feels more like a small litmus test than anything. Once you get past chapter 6, the meat of the book is intriguing, exciting, if not sometimes a bit confusing, with a dash of perplexing writing that you may need to take a minute to go back and reread. However, I have to praise Mr. Irvine for his intriguing use of the media blurbs to help drive the story forward. It's an engaging way to summarize what you've been reading while providing more intrigue and world building for how the world around our protagonist is reacting to these developments. It is a damn shame, however, that everything that happened in this book amounted ultimately to nothing. In the games, there's a small unlockable text story that says that the Riddler did pretty much nothing but got approval for using underground sewers to set up elaborate racetracks and do his usual trophy hiding around Gotham. There's nothing, and I mean nothing, to indicate that anything in this book happened in the Arkham universe. Which sucks because I liked this book. I really wish there was a nod or something to indicate that the Riddler actually accomplished anything substantial, but alas, no, he remains a garbage jobber incel with father issues. Anywho, Arkham Knight the Riddler's Gambit gets a B- from me. While it was decently exciting and good, there were bits that slowed down and ultimately amounted to nothing as a whole. I do have to praise Irvine for his unique world-building technique and overall prose. Alex Irvine is still active to this day, with his most recent video game tie-in being a Division novel back in 2019. He still writes video game stuff today and is a cool and active guy on Twitter. Check him out and buy his stuff, please. It goes to show that in the end, even if problems persist in something potentially good, not everything is the fault of just one person, and we shouldn't allow a faultless burden to hang over them.